In the winter of 1897, a surveyor named Thomas Aldridge stood at the edge of a frozen ridge in northern Montana, holding a government-issued map that should have saved lives. Instead, it buried them. The map showed a valley, a safe passage, a direct route through the Bitterroot Range that could cut 2 weeks off the journey west. Families trusted it. Wagon masters relied on it. The U.S. Geological Survey had printed it with an official seal, but the valley didn't exist. What lay beyond that ridge was a sheer drop into a basin of ice, rock, and silence. A place the Salish people had avoided for generations, a place they called the mouth that swallows. This is the story of what happened when 43 people followed a map into a landscape that had been drawn wrong. Thomas Aldridge was not a reckless man. Born in 1861 in Pennsylvania, he had worked for the Northern Pacific Railway as a cartographer's assistant before joining a private expedition contracted by the Department of the Interior. His job was to verify routes, update territorial maps, and ensure accuracy for settlers moving west. He was methodical, precise. His journals, preserved in the Montana Historical Society archives, reveal a man who measured twice, wrote once, and never trusted hearsay. But in November of 1897, Aldridge received a map that had been rushed into circulation. It was based on aerial sketches made from a hot air balloon survey conducted 3 years earlier, during a summer of clear skies. The cartographer who drew it had never set foot in the region. He had interpreted shadows as valleys and distances as shorter than they were. Aldridge didn't know this yet. On November 14th, he arrived in the town of Bristow Creek, a frontier settlement of 200 souls perched along the eastern edge of the Bitterroots. The town had no railroad, no telegraph. It existed because of the lumber mill and because it was the last stop before the mountains. That week, a caravan had gathered. 11 families, 43 people in total, including 16 children under the age of 12. They had come from Ohio, Missouri, and Iowa, farmers, tradesmen, a schoolteacher, a preacher's widow. They were heading to the Flathead Valley where land was cheap and rumors of fertile soil ran thick. They hired Aldridge as their guide. He accepted. He had the map. He had experience. And winter was closing in fast. If they didn't leave soon, they'd be trapped in Bristow Creek until April. The night before departure, Aldridge sat in the back room of the general store with the wagon master, a man named Cyrus Holt. Holt was older, grizzled, and had crossed the Bitterroots twice before, but never by this route. "You sure about this, Tom?" Holt asked, tapping the map with a thick finger. "It's printed by the government," Aldridge replied. "Survey team verified it. Survey team flew over it," Holt said quietly. "That's different." Aldridge didn't answer. He folded the map and placed it in his coat. Later that night, a Salish elder named Joseph Big Sky came to the edge of town. He spoke to one of the drivers, a man named Samuel Winters, and told him in broken English that the route Aldridge planned to take was a bad trail. He gestured toward the mountains and shook his head. Winters relayed this to Aldridge the next morning. Aldridge thanked him but dismissed it. "Old superstitions," he wrote in his journal. "The natives avoid certain places for spiritual reasons. We are men of science." On the morning of November 16, 1897, the caravan left Bristow Creek. 11 wagons, 43 people, 6 rifles, 3 hunting dogs, 1 map. The weather was cold but clear. The sky was pale and wide. The horses moved steadily up the wooded slopes, and by midday, the town had disappeared behind them. For 2 days, the journey went smoothly. They camped in clearings, cooked over small fires, sang hymns before bed. The children played in the snow. The adults spoke of Oregon, of California, of new beginnings. On the 3rd day, they reached the ridge. Aldridge stood at the front, map in hand, staring at the landscape ahead. According to the map, there should have been a valley, a gentle descent, a river, but there was nothing. Just a wall of stone, a steep drop, and beyond it, a basin of ice and shadow that stretched for miles, untouched, unmarked, and impossibly deep. Cyrus Holt dismounted and walked up beside him. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Aldridge turned the map sideways. He checked the compass. He looked again. And in that moment, standing at the edge of a place that shouldn't exist, Thomas Aldridge realized the truth. The map was wrong, and they were already too far in to turn back. To understand what happened next, you have to understand who these people were. They weren't adventurers. They weren't soldiers or explorers. They were farmers, shopkeepers, mothers, children, ordinary people chasing a promise that had been sold to them in newspapers and government pamphlets. Free land, fresh start, go west. Among them was Clara Brennan, a widow from Missouri, 34 years old, traveling with her two daughters, Eliza, age 9, and Margaret, age 6. Clara's husband had died of pneumonia the previous winter. She had sold their farm, packed what little they owned, and joined the caravan because staying meant poverty, and moving west meant hope. Her daughters kept a diary together. It still exists, housed in a private collection in Missoula. The handwriting is childish, uneven, but the words are clear. Mama says we will have a house with windows. Eliza says we will have a dog. I hope the dog is white. There was Reverend Peter Calloway, a Methodist preacher in his 50s, traveling with his wife, Constance, and their teenage son, Daniel. Calloway had been called to minister in the Flathead Valley. He carried a Bible, a small organ, and a trunk full of hymn books. In the evenings, he led the group in prayer. His voice, witnesses said, was deep and steady, a voice that made people feel safe. There was Isaac Drummond, a carpenter from Ohio, traveling with his pregnant wife, Hannah, and their 3 sons. Hannah was 7 months along. She rode in the back of their wagon, cushioned by blankets, her hands resting on her belly. Isaac had promised her they would reach the valley before the baby came. There was Samuel Winters, the man who had spoken with Joseph Big Sky. He was 26, unmarried, a blacksmith by trade. He had joined the caravan alone, carrying his tools and a rifle. He was quiet, but observant. In his letters, sent back to his brother in Iowa and discovered decades later, he had written, "The mountains here are not like the ones back home. They don't invite you in. They watch you." And there was Cyrus Holt, the wagon master. He was 53 years old, a former soldier, a man who had survived the Civil War and 2 crossings of the Rockies. He didn't speak much, but when he did, people listened. He had warned Aldridge about the route. He had felt the wrongness of it before they even reached the ridge, but he had stayed, because that's what a wagon master does. He stays with the group. For 3 days the journey had been almost pleasant. The weather held. The trail was rough but passable. At night they camped in clusters, the wagons drawn into loose circles, fires crackling low. The children played in the snow, building small forts and throwing ice balls. The women cooked beans, salt pork, and cornbread in cast-iron pots. The men smoked pipes and spoke quietly about crops, lumber prices, and the future. Clara Brennan wrote letters she would never send, sealing them in envelopes and keeping them in a tin box. One of those letters, dated November 17th, was found years later in the remains of her wagon. "The air here is so clean it almost hurts to breathe. Eliza asked me tonight if heaven looks like this. I didn't know what to say." Thomas Aldridge spent his evenings reviewing the map. He would sit near the fire, unfolding it carefully, tracing the printed lines with his finger. He made notes in the margins. He checked his compass. He measured distances against landmarks. He wanted to believe the map was right. But there were signs, small, quiet signs, that something was off. On the second day, they passed a grove of trees that had been stripped bare, their bark peeled away in long vertical tiers. Cyrus Holt had stopped his horse and stared at them for a long moment. "Bears?" someone asked. "No," Holt said. "Something else." He didn't elaborate. That same afternoon, they found a cairn, a pile of stones stacked carefully beside the trail. It was old, weathered, deliberate. Aldridge dismounted and examined it. "Marker," he said, "probably left by trappers." But Samuel Winters noticed something Aldridge didn't. At the base of the cairn, partially buried in snow, was a small wooden cross. It was crude, handmade, and very old. Winters said nothing. He remounted his horse and kept moving. That night the dogs wouldn't settle. They paced the edge of the camp, whining low in their throats, their ears pinned back. One of them, a hound named Blue, stood at the edge of the firelight and barked once, sharp and sudden, at the darkness beyond. Then it went silent. No one slept well that night. The next morning, November 18th, they broke camp early. The sky was grey, heavy with the promise of snow. The air was colder, the horses moved slower. By midday they reached the ridge, and that's when everything changed. Aldridge stood at the front, map in hand, staring at the impossible landscape ahead. The map showed a valley, a river, a passage, but there was no valley. There was only a drop, a sheer descent into a basin of rock and ice, surrounded on three sides by cliffs that rose like prison walls. The wind howled up from the basin, carrying with it a sound that wasn't quite wind. Something hollow, something old. Cyrus Holt dismounted. He walked up beside Aldridge and looked at the map. Then he looked at the basin. "We're not going down there," Holt said quietly. Aldridge didn't answer. "Tom," Holt said, "we turn back. Now." Aldridge folded the map. His jaw was tight. His hands were shaking, though whether from cold or fear, no one could say. "We're 3 days in," Aldridge said. "If we turn back, we won't make it to Bristow Creek before the snow hits. We'll be trapped in the open." "And if we go down there?" Holt asked. Aldridge looked at him. "The map says there's a pass on the other side." "The map," Holt said slowly, "is wrong." For a long moment neither man spoke. Behind them the families waited. The children were cold. The women were tired. The men were watching. Clara Brennan held her daughters close. Reverend Calloway prayed silently, his lips moving without sound. Isaac Drummond looked at his pregnant wife and felt something twist in his chest, a feeling he couldn't name but would remember for the rest of his life. And Samuel Winters sat on his horse, staring down into the basin, and thought of the Salish elders' warning, "Bad trail." Aldridge turned to face the group. He raised his voice calm and steady, the voice of a man who had made a decision. "We go forward," he said. "There's a pass. We'll find it." No one argued. They started the descent. The descent began just after noon. The wagons moved slowly, wheels locked with chains to keep them from sliding. The horses strained against the weight, their hooves slipping on loose stone and frozen mud. The drivers walked beside them, gripping the reins, speaking in low, steady voices, the kind of voice you use when you're trying to convince yourself as much as the animal. The basin opened before them like a mouth. It was wider than it had looked from above. The walls rose on three sides, jagged and grey, streaked with ice that gleamed dully in the flat winter light. The floor of the basin was uneven, scattered with boulders, patches of snow and something else. Bones. Samuel Winters saw them first. He was riding near the front, his rifle across his lap, his eyes scanning the ground. At first he thought they were branches, but branches don't have joints, branches don't have skulls. They were animal bones. Elk, mostly. Some deer. Scattered across the basin floor in clusters, half buried in snow, picked clean and white. He said nothing, but he slowed his horse and let the others pass. By mid-afternoon, the entire caravan had reached the basin floor. They gathered in a loose circle, the wagons drawn close, the horses stamping nervously. The wind had picked up. It didn't blow in any one direction. It swirled, eddied, carried sound in strange ways. A voice from one side of the group would echo from another. A child's laugh would sound twice, 3 times from different directions. It was disorienting. Aldridge stood in the center, map in hand, compass spinning uselessly in his palm. He turned in a slow circle, looking for the pass. The map said it should be on the western wall. A narrow gap, a way through. But the western wall was solid. No gap, no pass, no way out. Cyrus Holt walked over to him. His face was hard, his voice low. "We need to go back. Now." Aldridge didn't look at him. "There's a pass." "There's no pass, Tom. The map is wrong," Holt said, his voice rising. "You know it, I know it, we all know it." The group had gone quiet. Everyone was watching. Aldridge finally looked up. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed from the cold. If we go back now, we'll be caught in the open when the snow hits. We won't make it. And if we stay here? Holt asked. Aldridge said nothing. Holt stepped closer. We're in a hole, Tom. A dead end. If the storm comes while we're down here, we're finished. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind. Then Reverend Calloway stepped forward. His voice was calm, steady, the voice of a man trying to hold a room together. Perhaps we should take a vote. Holt shook his head. This isn't a town meeting, Reverend. This is survival. Then let's survive together, Calloway said. We're frightened. We're cold. But we're still a community. Let's decide as one. It was a kind sentiment. It was also a mistake, because communities don't survive in places like this. Individuals do. And by the time they realized that, it was too late. They voted. 11 families. 43 people. 22 voted to stay and search for the pass. 21 voted to turn back. It was almost perfectly split. Aldridge, as the guide, cast the deciding vote. We stay, he said. And that was it. The decision was made. They made camp in the center of the basin. The wagons were drawn into a tight circle. Fires were lit, though the wood burned strangely, too fast with too much smoke, as if the air itself was swallowing the flames. The children were subdued. No one played. No one sang. Clara Brennan sat in the back of her wagon with Eliza and Margaret pressed against her sides. She stared out at the grey walls surrounding them and felt, for the first time, a kind of fear she had no words for. Margaret whispered, "Mama, I don't like it here." Clara held her tighter. "I know, sweetheart. We'll leave tomorrow." But she didn't believe it. That night, the temperature dropped. By sunset, the wind had become a scream. It tore through the basin, whipping snow into blinding sheets, rattling the canvas wagon covers, drowning out voices. The fires guttered and died. The horses panicked, stamping and pulling at their tethers. One broke free and bolted into the darkness. No one followed. The families huddled inside their wagons, wrapped in blankets, holding each other. And then, around midnight, the snow stopped. The wind died. The silence that followed was so complete, so absolute, that it felt like a physical presence. Samuel Winters was awake. He sat in his wagon, rifle in his lap, staring out at the basin. The moon had broken through the clouds, and the snow glowed pale and blue. That's when he saw the tracks. They led from the edge of the camp, out into the basin, in a straight line toward the western wall. Human tracks. Barefoot, Winters climbed out of the wagon, his breath misting in the freezing air. He followed the tracks, moving slowly, quietly, his rifle raised. The tracks stopped at the base of the western wall, and then they went up. Not up a slope, not up a trail. Straight up the sheer rock face, as if whoever, or whatever, had made them, had simply walked up the side of the cliff and disappeared. Winters stood there for a long time, staring at the tracks, his heart pounding in his chest. Then he turned and walked back to camp. He told no one. The next morning, November 19th, they woke to find that the basin had changed. The boulders had shifted. The walls looked closer. And the bones, the scattered animal bones they had seen the day before, were gone. Not buried, not covered by snow. Gone. Cyrus Holt walked the perimeter of the camp, his face grim. He stopped beside Aldridge and spoke quietly, so the others wouldn't hear. "We're leaving," Holt said. "Right now. I don't care about the vote. I don't care about the map. We're leaving." Aldridge nodded slowly. For the first time, he looked defeated. Agreed. They began to pack. The families moved quickly, silently, loading the wagons, hitching the horses. No one spoke. No one looked at the walls. And then, just as they were ready to leave, someone screamed. It was Hannah Drummond. She was standing beside her wagon, clutching her belly, her face twisted in pain. The baby was coming. Isaac Drummond ran to her side, his hands shaking, his voice breaking. "Not now. Please, not now." But the baby didn't care. Constance Calloway and 2 other women rushed to help. They brought Hannah into the back of the wagon, laid out blankets, boiled water over a hastily rekindled fire. The men stood outside, helpless, waiting. The labor lasted 3 hours. The baby, a boy, was born just after noon. He was small, too small. He didn't cry, Constance wrapped him in a blanket and handed him to Hannah, her face pale, her voice soft. "I'm sorry." Hannah held her son. She stared at his tiny, still face. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. Isaac stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his eyes empty. Reverend Calloway said a prayer. They buried the baby that afternoon at the base of the western wall in a shallow grave marked with stones. No one said it, but everyone felt it. The basin had taken something from them, and it wasn't finished. That night, as the sun set and the shadows grew long, Thomas Aldridge stood at the edge of the camp, staring up at the walls. He still held the map, and for the first time he wondered if the map hadn't been wrong by accident. He wondered if it had been wrong on purpose. They didn't leave that day. Hannah Drummond couldn't be moved. She lay in the back of the wagon, pale and silent, her eyes open but unseeing. Isaac sat beside her, holding her hand, whispering words no one else could hear. The group waited. By nightfall, the temperature had dropped again. The sky was clear, cold, and crowded with stars. The kind of sky that should have been beautiful. But here, surrounded by walls of stone, it felt oppressive, as if the stars themselves were watching. Cyrus Holt organized a watch rotation. 4 men, 2-hour shifts, rifles loaded. Samuel Winters volunteered for the first watch. So did Daniel Calloway, the Reverend's son, eager to prove himself. The night passed slowly. At 2 a.m., during the second watch, one of the men, a farmer named Owen Fletcher, heard something. It came from the direction of the western wall, a sound like scraping, stone on stone, slow, deliberate, rhythmic. Fletcher stood, rifle raised, peering into the darkness. "Who's there?" he called. The scraping stopped. Silence. Fletcher took a step forward, then another, and then he saw it. A figure standing at the base of the wall, perfectly still, facing away from him. It was too dark to see clearly, but the shape was human. Tall, thin. "Hey!" Fletcher shouted. "Who are you?" The figure didn't move. Fletcher's hands were shaking. He raised the rifle, aimed at the figure's back. "I said, who are you?" The figure turned. Slowly, too slowly, and Fletcher saw its face. Or rather, he saw where its face should have been. He screamed. The camp exploded into chaos. Men grabbed rifles, women pulled children close, dogs barked and snarled. Fletcher ran back toward the wagon, stumbling, gasping, his face white. "What did you see?" Holt demanded. Fletcher couldn't speak. He just pointed toward the wall, his hand trembling. A group of men, Holt, Winters, Aldridge, and 2 others, moved toward the wall, rifles raised, torches held high. There was nothing there. No figure, no tracks. No sign that anyone had been standing there at all. But at the base of the wall, where the figure had been, they found something. A stone cairn. It hadn't been there before. It was identical to the one they had passed on the trail 3 days earlier, carefully stacked, deliberate, old. And at the base of the cairn, half buried in snow, was another wooden cross. Samuel Winters knelt beside it. He brushed the snow away and saw something carved into the wood. Letters, worn, faint, but still legible. A single word, turn. Winters looked up at Holt. "We need to leave, now." Holt nodded. At first light, but first light never came. Sometime around 4 a.m., the wind returned. It came without warning, howling through the basin like a living thing, tearing at the wagons, ripping canvas, scattering embers from the fires. The temperature plummeted. Within minutes, visibility dropped to nothing. The world became a wall of white. The blizzard had arrived. The families huddled inside the wagons, packed together for warmth, listening to the wind shriek and moan. The children cried. The adults prayed. The storm lasted 14 hours. When it finally stopped, the sun was setting again. A full day had passed. The camp was buried under 3 feet of snow. 2 of the wagons had collapsed under the weight. One of the horses was dead, frozen upright in its harness. The others were weak, starving, their ribs showing through their coats. And the walls of the basin had grown closer. It was impossible. It was undeniable. The space they had camped in the night before, a clearing perhaps 200 feet across, was now barely 100. The walls had moved. No one said it out loud, but everyone felt it. Cyrus Holt called a meeting. The adults gathered in a circle, their faces hollow, their voices low. "We have two choices," Holt said. "We try to climb out, or we wait for help. No one knows we're here," Aldridge said quietly. "No one's coming. Then we climb," Isaac Drummond said. His voice was flat, empty. He hadn't left Hannah's side since the baby died. "The walls are sheer," someone said. "We'd need ropes, anchors." "We have ropes," Holt said. "We use the wagons for anchors. We send the strongest climbers first. They secure a line. We pull the rest up." It was a desperate plan, but it was the only plan they had. They began the next morning. Samuel Winters and Daniel Calloway volunteered to climb first. They tied ropes around their waists, secured the other ends to the wagons, and started up the western wall. The rock was slick with ice. Every handhold was a gamble. Every foothold could give way. They climbed for 2 hours. Daniel Calloway was 20 feet from the top when his handhold broke. He fell. The rope caught him, jerking him to a stop 10 feet below. He hung there, spinning slowly, gasping for air. Samuel Winters, 15 feet above him, shouted down, "You okay?" Daniel nodded, too shaken to speak. They tried again. This time Daniel made it to the top. So did Winters. They stood on the ridge, looking down at the camp, and felt a surge of hope. They had made it. They secured the rope, tied it to a tree, and signaled for the next climber. That's when they saw the other side of the ridge, the side they had descended from 3 days earlier. It wasn't there anymore. The slope, the trail, the path they had taken down, all of it was gone. In its place was another wall, sheer, unclimbable. The basin was a box, and they were sealed inside. Samuel Winters stared at the impossible landscape, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Daniel Calloway turned to him, his face pale. "What do we do?" Winters didn't answer. He couldn't. Below them in the camp, the families waited, and slowly, one by one, they began to realize the truth. They weren't getting out. Over the next 3 days, the situation deteriorated. The food ran out. The horses were slaughtered. The meat rationed. The children stopped crying. They sat quietly, wrapped in blankets, their faces blank. Clara Brennan held Eliza and Margaret close. She sang to them softly, songs from their childhood, songs about home. Reverend Calloway led prayers every morning and every night. His voice grew weaker each day, but he never stopped. Isaac Drummond sat beside Hannah, who hadn't spoken since the baby died. He held her hand and stared at nothing. Thomas Aldridge sat alone, the map spread across his knees. He stared at it for hours, tracing the lines with his finger, trying to understand, trying to find the mistake. But there was no mistake. The map had been drawn to lead them here. And on the 4th night, as the cold settled over the camp like a shroud, Thomas Aldridge walked to the edge of the basin, knelt in the snow, and pressed his forehead against the stone wall. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The wall didn't answer, but deep in the stone, something shifted, and the basin grew smaller still. In the spring of 1898, a Salish hunting party found the basin. They had been tracking elk through the high country when one of the younger men noticed something strange, a gap in the ridge that hadn't been there before. Or perhaps it had always been there, and they had simply learned not to see it. They approached cautiously. The basin was empty. No wagons, no bodies, no bones, just snow, stone, and silence. But at the center where the camp had been, they found something. A cairn, larger than the others, carefully built, deliberate, and around it, arranged in a perfect circle, were 43 stones, one for each person. The hunting party didn't enter the basin. They marked the location, returned to their village, and reported what they had found to the Indian agent assigned to the region. The agent, a man named Howard Griggs, filed a report with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. The report was brief, skeptical, and ultimately ignored. It wasn't until the fall of 1898, when the families failed to arrive in the Flathead Valley, that anyone began to ask questions. Letters were sent. Inquiries were made. The town of Bristow Creek was contacted. Yes, they said. A caravan had left in November. 11 families. A guide named Thomas Aldridge. They had headed into the mountains. They had never come back. A search party was organized in the spring of 1899. It was led by a federal marshal named Edward Klein and included 2 experienced mountaineers, a Salish guide, and a surveyor from the U.S. Geological Survey. They found the basin. They found the cairn. They found the 43 stones. But they found no bodies, no wagons, no tools, no clothing, no sign that anyone had ever been there at all. The surveyor, a man named Philip Morris, examined the basin carefully. He took measurements, he checked the maps, and then he made a discovery that no one could explain. According to the original survey map, the one Thomas Aldridge had carried, the basin didn't exist. The map showed a valley, a passage, a safe route, but according to every other map, every geological survey conducted before and after, the basin had always been there. It was as if the map Aldridge had used had been drawn from a different world, or drawn to create one. Morris reported his findings. The case was officially closed in 1900, classified as a probable avalanche with total loss of remains. It was a lie, but it was a lie people could live with. In 1923, a historian named Margaret Ashford began researching unsolved disappearances in the American West. She was particularly interested in cases involving large groups, wagon trains, mining parties, entire communities that had simply vanished. She found the case of the Bristow Creek caravan. She spent 3 years tracking down records, interviewing descendants, and visiting the region. She located Samuel Winter's letters. She found Clara Brennan's diary. She uncovered Thomas Aldridge's journals. And she discovered something else: the map. It had been stored in the archives of the Montana Historical Society, misfiled under obsolete survey documents. She requested it, examined it, and immediately noticed something wrong. The paper was too new. The ink was too fresh. The map had been dated 1894, but the paper stock wasn't manufactured until 1896. Someone had created the map specifically for that expedition, and they had created it to fail. Ashford tried to publish her findings. She wrote letters to academic journals, historical societies, and government agencies. She was ignored, dismissed, quietly discouraged. In 1926, she received an unsigned letter. It was brief. Some trails are meant to be forgotten. Let this one rest. She never published her research. The documents were donated to the Montana Historical Society after her death in 1954. They remain there today in a box labeled Bristow Creek Incident, unverified. Most people have never heard of it. In 1987, a group of hikers stumbled across the basin. They had been backpacking through the Bitterroots, off-trail, exploring. They found the ridge. They found the gap. They descended into the basin. It was beautiful, they said later. Quiet. Peaceful. They made camp. That night, one of them, a woman named Jennifer Hale, woke to the sound of scraping, stone on stone, slow, deliberate. She looked out of her tent and saw a figure standing at the edge of the camp. Tall, thin, facing away. She screamed. The group packed up and left immediately, climbing out of the basin in the dark, stumbling, falling, desperate. They reported the incident to the Park Service. A ranger was sent to investigate. He found the basin. He found the cairn. He found the 43 stones. He also found something else. Carved into the base of the cairn, in letters so faint they were almost invisible, was a single sentence. The map was wrong. We stayed. Don't follow. The ranger filed a report recommending the basin be closed to public access. The recommendation was denied, but the trail was quietly removed from all official maps. Today, if you look at a topographical map of the Bitterroot Range, you won't find the basin. It isn't marked. It isn't named. It simply isn't there. But the Salish people still know where it is. They call it Apsa Luke Pasta, the mouth that swallows. And they teach their children not to go there, not because of spirits, not because of superstition, but because some places remember, and some places are still hungry. In 2003, A woman named Eliza Brennan Cole, age 106, was interviewed in a nursing home in Seattle. She was the last known descendant of the Bristow Creek caravan. Her grandmother had been Clara Brennan. Her mother had never spoken about what happened, but Eliza had found the diary, the one Clara's daughters had kept. She had read it, kept it, carried it with her for 80 years. When the interviewer asked her if she believed the family had died in an avalanche, Eliza smiled. It was not a happy smile. "No," she said quietly. "I don't think they died at all." "And then what happened to them?" Eliza looked out the window, at the gray Seattle sky, at the rain streaking the glass. "I think they're still there," she said, waiting for someone to follow. She died 3 weeks later. The diary was never found. There are places in the world that don't appear on maps, not because they've been forgotten, but because they were never meant to be found. The basin in the Bitterroot Range is one of them. It sits in silence, wrapped in stone and snow, patient and still. And if you listen, really listen, you can still hear them. 43 voices singing hymns in the dark. 43 stones waiting for 44. The map was wrong. They stayed, and the basin is still hungry.